But the thing is, the initial, even though movies were the initial inspiration, there were no cameras or, or anybody, I didn't know anybody who was involved in film in any way. So the next best thing was comic books. That was still pictures telling stories. And also there was a Star Wars adaptation that I had fallen in love with. So they all kind of fed off each other, and kind of this fascination was born.
Now, did that inspire you to make your own versions of Star Wars?
Absolutely.
When you were a kid?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, a good friend of mine and myself created something called Empire, which, shockingly enough, oh, we lost the lady already. Goodbye, man. Was like a ripoff of The Empire Strikes Back, surprisingly enough. And yeah, we thought we were being original with this story, but we were not. We were shamelessly ripping off George Lucas's creation.
And so then, when did it dawn on you that it was something that you could do once you got older? Did you have any hurdles?
Oh yeah.
Because I can just tell you, not to make this about me, but being from West Indian heritage, I know that I had a huge love of comic books. I love Star Wars as well too.
Right.
But my parents were like, no. Go get a respectable gig.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Well, my parents were also, no, go get a respectable gig. But I don't know. I just I've always been the kind of person who's going to follow his own muse. It's my life. I mean, they can't live it for me. They can't be policing me 24/7. So I just kind of followed my own muse.
And then when it came to that first gig, what was it?
First gig. There used to be a company called Kamiko back in, I think they started in the late 70s. They were definitely around in the 80s when I got into comics. And I didn't realize it until later on, but they were kind of, they were a publisher that was designed to kind of bring people into the industry. They'd bring newcomers in, pay them a couple of bucks, get them to do a ton of work for free sometimes. I had both experiences, getting paid and not getting paid. But there was a chance for like a newbie to come in and get some work published and build a career. And I started doing, I don't know if, I'm sure people in this room are familiar with Grendel, Matt Wagner's creation, Grendel. I started doing Grendel comics like when I was 18. That was like my first paid gig. And it was amazing after years of kind of just wanting to see my name on a comic book and my pictures in the book, and to finally like get that first copy was just an amazing. I still remember that excitement. I showed it to my mom. She didn't care, but I was excited.
And when you look back at Grendel and you look at kind of like the beginnings of your experiences in comic books,
Yes.
What was like the biggest surprise in terms of moving out of what you thought the industry was and what you thought being a freelance artist would be, and then the realities of it?
That's a great question. Probably, it's one thing, I always put a lot of pressure on myself. I was never, motivation has never been difficult for me. I've always gotten up in the morning and done what I needed to do, spent the day perfecting what I was working on. But it's one thing when you're putting that pressure on yourself, and it's a different thing when you've got external forces putting pressure on you, and there was money involved, even at the low level that Kamiko was paying back in the day. It's just a different thing. So I suddenly felt the need to become a professional. That kind of forces you to change your mindset a little bit. It goes from being a hobby or whatever to a job with responsibilities. And so that was a little bit of an adjustment, but not too much. Actually, kind of after a while, I realized I liked that pressure, and I liked that sense of kind of being involved and of having other people with expectations on what I was doing. It made me feel like I was part of a team. I was contributing to a larger endeavor than just my own particular interests.
And how did that change not only just your output, but also your approach to like pages when you got a script?
It just changes. It just makes you. It forces you to think more like a professional. Before that, if I didn't feel like working, I just didn't work. I go out and hang out with friends, get drunk, did a lot of that, became a pro, I became much more disciplined. That's really the main thing. Just treating it as, just forgetting that it's, treating it like it's like a job, like a full-time, actual profession as opposed to just a fun thing to do.
And did that kind of rein in your risk-taking creatively?
No.
Or did it allow you to kind of flourish?
It actually kind of kickstarted the creativity. I realized that I had a little tiny bit of an audience, and it's very energizing knowing that you have eyeballs on your work. I think maybe for some people it might kind of inspire a bit of fear. Maybe they might shrink a little bit knowing that people are going to be judging the work. But I always found it really kind of exciting. I have you as an audience, and you think you know what you're going to get, but I'm going to challenge you from time to time. I'm going to surprise you here and there. That was invigorating for me. And I also realized that there's like a world of possibilities within our medium. You can do anything you want.
And so being a Black creator, did that change not only your creative process, but any inspirations that you look to?
No, my creative process, no. The thing is, when I started out, I knew that there had been the occasional Black creator throughout comics. But I wasn't really aware, and these were figures from, some of them were contemporary, like Keith Pollard was a guy who was working when I started out, Dennis Cowan, obviously. But then there were people like Billy Graham from the past that I was unaware of until later on. And other figures, and I for a long time I thought I'm like the one brother in the entire comic book industry, and I never tried to shy away from that. I was leaned into it. But I also was aware that was going to be potentially a limiting factor. I never let that stop me. I always did what I wanted to do. I've always been highly ambitious, but I always knew that was going to be, it's going to hold me back a little bit, and it has, to be honest.
Because it's the one thing that I noticed. We'll get to King because I want to talk about that a little bit. But one thing that I've noticed, just as a fan, is that of comics in general, that usually when you have a Black creator, they get the Black character.
Yeah, totally.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, editors don't tend to have very much imagination. They see your surface. I'm sure this is true for women cartoonists as well. They probably only get the female characters to draw. I'm sure in some cases that's what they would prefer to draw. I'm often very comfortable drawing Black characters, but it would be nice to be able to break out of that box. I started doing some work for Marvel Comics a few years ago, and the one character that I got my hands on that was a non-Black character was Spider-Man. Super fun to write, enjoyed the hell out of it, would like to do more. But usually it's Blade, or it's Luke Cage, or it's whomever. I'm not complaining about that. I'm happy to do the job and to do the work and to have the work. But it would be nice if there was if the box wasn't so confined.
And so, getting back to being a Black creator, when you take on a project like King, is there an added responsibility throughout the whole project? Yes.
I actually kind of took it upon myself to ignore that responsibility to a large extent because I just found that was going to be, I felt that would be a little stifling creatively if you're always concerned about how you're going to be perceived. Are you doing justice to the character? At the same time, I was painfully aware that this was a cultural figure of great significance and that a lot of eyeballs potentially would be on this particular work, and that given his cultural significance and his importance, that the work needed to be approached with a certain level of just respect, you can't kind of tell King's story in a half-assed way. You need to do the research and understand his philosophy and bring that to bear on what you're doing. Now that didn't stop me from having some fun here and there. I was a younger man when I was working on that book, and there were a few little things in the margins that perhaps I wouldn't do today. I'm not going to mention anything, but there's a couple panels in there where I'm like, maybe I wouldn't draw that anymore. But yeah, I reserve the right to kind of have fun and to bring my own, personal quirks and sensibility to the material. Because nobody's reading that stuff. Yes, you're reading the comic to get a sense of who King was, but you always want to have the creator's voice in there. Otherwise, just have it be done by AI. So yeah, I never shied away from putting myself into the King work.
And then when you went to write novels, how did not having visuals as part of your storytelling apparatus then affect how you produced what you made?
The weird thing is, this is kind of a strange thing to say, but there was an interview from like way back in 1983 with the cartoonist Dave Sin and his wife at the time and publisher Denny LeBear, who I got to meet at TCAF recently, and it was absolutely awesome. Side note. And at any rate, during this interview, the interviewer asked, maybe Dave brought it up himself, I forget how it came about, but at any rate, Dave made a comment that he felt that he was more of a writer who drew as opposed to an artist who wrote. It was kind of a weird way to approach the work in a sense, but it resonated for me. And I've always kind of felt more drawn to the writing side of it, to the conceptual side of it. It just so happens that I got lucky and I'm a pretty decent artist on top of it. So for me, words have always come extremely easy. There's never been a struggle getting dialogue out or prose out or journalism out or anything that I've written. So I've been lucky that way. So it felt very natural when I've stepped away from the visuals. It's actually kind of nice to just not have to. Sometimes as cartoonists, it can. It's like anything else. If you do the same thing, it can become a little bit rote. And it's nice sometimes, somebody who writes and draws most of their stuff, to not be an artist sometimes, or not to be a writer sometimes. It's nice to get somebody else's script occasionally and, put my sensibility into their idiom. And
there's also a different kind of like sweat equity, and this isn't to disparage any side of the creative process.
Absolutely.
But like writing a page versus drawing what's on that page,
yes, sir.
It's like a 10x kind of thing.
Absolutely correct. So it takes you half an hour to write a page, and 3 days to draw that son of a bitch.
So then, when you're doing your prose, are you then not more free, just like I don't want to draw a car, but now I can write about a car and go into detail. Does that change things for you?
Well, the writer in me has never shied away from challenging the artist in me, so I have to kind of have a little fun knowing that I'm going to be torturing myself later on. It's like I'm going to write a massive crowd scene with 100 cars and horses and explosions in the background. Amazing to write. Fuck, I got to draw this goddamn thing later on. So I don't mind putting stuff in that I'm going to have a little bit of trouble with later on. Well, what's nice is, as a writer in comics, your work is, it's not meant to be read. It's meant to be absorbed by an editor, by the artist, but nobody reads a script. A comic book writer without an artist is just throwing out words that nobody's ever going to read. It's nice when you actually write prose or journalism or whatever, the words are the thing. It's a complete piece unto itself. That's kind of nice. That's a nice feeling. And
we're now going to transition into film. When I think of comic books and I think of film or movies, I think they're the same, just one static and one isn't. And also, the crew is a lot smaller.
A lot smaller.
A lot smaller.
And the budgets.
And the budgets, absolutely. So when you are, as a filmmaker, what was your biggest kind of takeaway moving into it? Was there a fear that you conquered? Or was it something where you're like, I'm actually freed from some of the shackles of either writing prose or making comics?
Yeah, I mean, it's I love comics for comics. Before I started before I picked up a camera and started to make stuff, I did have a bit of movement envy in comics and sound envy. In films. I had sound envy. Being able to move an image around is exciting. And being able to combine that moving image with a sound is also incredibly exciting. Those two things are lost in comics. They just don't exist in comics. Before I picked up a camera, I was always kind of looking for the ways that I could like make little movies on the page. As soon as I did pick up a camera and started working with crews, that all immediately went away. And I started to become more and more invested in what exists entirely on the page, what comics can do that only comics can do. And so that's really great. But one of the great things about getting into film was being able to work with other people. You know, I like the fact that I can go home, go to my studio, be entirely creative on my own terms, not have to answer to anybody, and then the next day go on a set and I've got, you know, gear that I'm working with and amazing actors to work with and, you know, a DP and whomever else. That's really great, being able to be creative with a whole posse. And the gear is exciting to work with too.
And so did you train for film, or was it something that you just jumped into?
I jumped in first. Me and my friend, my buddy, we made 20-minute short films before I got into film school. Then after that, I went to the Toronto Film School and then Sheridan Film School. And then I joined IATSE, the Motion Picture Union. So I had an interesting trajectory. The thing about movie making is I didn't want to kind of be a tourist. I wanted to like really like learn the craft from the ground up. And then, you know, so when I finally was on the set, I felt like, okay, I belong as opposed to just some jerk who's parachuted in. So, so going to film school was incredibly helpful. Still work with a lot of the same people today. Highly invaluable experience. The thing is, I kind of wish I had that experience for comics too. Because I'm jealous of people like, I used to watch cartoonist kayfabe a lot. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that YouTube show. Stopped watching it in the wake of one of the hosts, what happened with him. But I used to watch that show a lot, and one of the hosts, Ed Piskor, would talk a lot about how he'd gone to I think it was the School of Visual Arts. It's the Kubrick School. Thank you. And I really was jealous of that experience because, like, my comic school was on the page. It was on the printed page. So every horrible mistake that I made is like still out there for all to see and make fun of me for. I'd make fun of myself for a lot of those mistakes. But it would have been great to have made all those same mistakes, which I was going to make anyway, but do it in a class environment, get it out there where it's never going to really be seen, and then have the premium work, have that stuff grace the page. Didn't work out for me that way, but it is what it is.
And are we going to get more films from you?
Yeah, so the last thing that I directed was was a movie called Le Corbeau, which is where I learned the true value of having the right collaborators, because I was fortunately stuck with the wrong collaborator on that project, and we kind of paid the price. Since then, my filmmaking has kind of been confined mostly to screenwriting, which has been wicked fun, pays awesome. Not as much fun though as being on a set and directing that, and be working with the crew and everybody. So I'm trying to get back on the set as a director.
Perfect. And we're going to wrap up pretty soon, and I'd like to go back to comics in a way.
Absolutely.
I've heard that you're looking at a project with the Canadian Whites.
Oh yeah, that's one of the things on the slate.
Can you give us some more information about what that is exactly?
It's kind of the least developed of the stuff that I'm working on, so there's not a whole lot to report at this point, but there's I don't know how many people are familiar with the Canadian Whites, but they were black and white comic books that were created during the Second World War. I forget exactly what the act was, the War Conservation Act, I think it was, something like that, where goods from the United States and from all over the world stopped being imported into Canada. And so that kind of included comics, so that opened up a window where we could publish our own comics. They call them Canadian Whites, which has a kind of a dicey title today, to be honest, because they started out in color, and then they realized that it was just cheaper and more expeditious to get the things out there in black and white. And there was a character in those comics called the Penguin. Not the Penguin from DC Comics. He was kind of like a Batman light. He wore a tuxedo and he drove a fancy car. We never saw his face, which I loved because it kind of allowed me to put my own identity into him. But he wore a penguin mask. He wore a goofy looking, like a balaclava with a giant beak on the front. Kind of ridiculous, but so cool. Like, I loved that character as a child, and I continue to love him today. And I had an idea for a story, a World War II set story, about him kind of facing off against a war criminal that turns out to be a serial killer. But it's still in the works. There's other stuff that's ahead of it with you.
And with regards to the whites, is there anything about the subject matter of that time period? Because obviously, like, look at like some of the Warner Brothers cartoons, and they're a product of their time.
Yes.
Right? And there are versions that I saw that I would have seen being of a certain age, born in 1971, that are totally edited now, right. Or even some that you just can't see anymore. Are there any aspects of the whites that carry some of that kind of legacy as well as burden that you've encountered in your research?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of horrific racial stereotypes. I mean, this is wartime, so Japanese people were not, well represented, let us say, in the Canadian whites. A lot of horrible Japanese stereotypes, a lot of coon stereotypes. There's a lot of that stuff going on in those comics. You know what? I don't judge that material through today's lens. That stuff was created in the 1940s. People were with a certain mindset at that point, and quite willing to express that mindset. I think that's fine. That's what it was, and I don't think that should be censored or painted over or anything. I think these are valuable historical documents for what they are. Now, if I wind up doing this penguin story, am I going to continue those horrible Japanese and black stereotypes? Hell no. Those characters are going to have the dignity and respect that they deserve. But I would never go back and say, get rid of those old comics, or don't republish them, or censor these panels, or whatever. None of that business.
Yeah, when you think of like Huck Finn or like Tintin, those kind of books, like I loved Tintin. Like when we had the Scholastic,
crazy racist.
What? On another level.
Absolutely.
But I was dying for whenever we had a Scholastic book fair because I could go in and dive in and get a new edition. But then when you see some of the portrayals, there's that like ick cringe factor. But then that where you're conflicted as a not only a consumer but also a cartoonist is you can't throw, for lack of a better expression, the baby out with the bathwater. And so you look at what those are almost like the building blocks, and sometimes the foundations of the houses we're in are shaky, but it doesn't mean that you have to knock down the entire house.
Absolutely correct. Totally agree.
Right? And so if you can kind of reimagine those things, because even the Superman of today is not the Superman of 1936 or whenever it was he debuted, but to not have that character and then what has spawned from that, I think is a loss for all of us.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. No notes.
Okay, great. And so, past the Whites project that you're working with the Penguin, what can we look forward to from you next?
I can't say. Sorry, what's that, Robin?
Romance comics.
Who comes? Oh, romance comics. Yeah, that's right. Well, the thing is, I fit. So my last book was a sci-fi comic called Godhead, and after that, I started doing writing a bunch of scripts, film scripts. I've kind of been out of the comics game for a year and a bit now. But I've been working very hard to set up some new projects. They're in the stage where I can't really talk about them at this point. But as my good friend Robin just said, one of them is a romance comic that I want to do. I just always loved romance comics when I was a younger person. Not so much when I was a kid, but when I got big into Love and Rockets when I was a teenager, and which I always just thought it was like romance soap opera essentially. I've spoken to the publisher Gary Groth about that, and he's like, "It is not soap opera." I'm like, "Gary, you're wrong."
Gary's too hard.
Gary's a hard man, but I always loved kind of slice of life stories. Everybody loves love. Everybody needs love, and there's a lot that I feel like I can do with the romance genre. So yeah, that's one of the things I'm hoping to work on in the next little while. But I think probably the next thing that I'm going to do is probably going to be either a YA book or a series of biographies, like short biographies.
Perfect. Well, totally looking forward to what you're going to come up with.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
And because of time, I'm going to turn it to you, the audience. Do we have any questions?
One or two. Robin Fisher in the house.
I've always wondered why you decided to do a book on Martin Luther King when you're Canadian and your background is British West Indian.
Because I got a job doing it. They offered me money to do it.
Because even like Harriet Tubman, the Underground Railway, finished in St. Catharines, so it's like there's a Canadian flag icon.
Dude, if they'd asked me to do a Harriet Tubman book, I would have totally done that. But when I first broke in, my first work after Kimiko was at Fantagraphics Books. Noted, yeah, at the time it was a LA publisher, but now they're a Seattle-based publisher. And my first job there was called kind of a smutty thriller called "I Want to Be Your Dog." And when I got that job, the publisher, Gary Groth, he's like, dude, I want to do a series of historical biographical comics. I want to start with Martin Luther King. What are your thoughts? Do you want to do it? Before he could finish the sentence, I said yes. Because when you're a cartoonist trying to break in, it's tough to break into any field, really. It's very difficult to break into comics, at least it was back in the 1990s. And when you've got somebody who's agreed to publish your first book and then offering you a second book, like without any questions asked, only an idiot says no. I'm not the smartest person in this room, but I'm not the dumbest either. So I said yes. And so that's how that came about. But yeah, Harriet Tubman would be an awesome subject to do a book about. Absolutely.
Definitely. I think we had a question over here.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any thoughts or advice on how to build community and make comics more welcoming so we get more voices?
That's a great question. Not really, other than just do the work. Do the work and do work.
You can hire you to be the head TCAP,
Well,
which just happened this year.
That did happen. I'm very proud of that. That's very cool. But I think it should come from the work, and I think we should always be willing, as cartoonists, to reach out to other cartoonists. I think if we want to do that, I think it's incumbent upon us to build a community around us and to do the kind of work that is not going to exclude, but is going to include. And by that, I'm not like talking some kind of kumbaya, let's all hands and pretend that everybody loves each other and there's no strife in the world, because clearly there is. But that doesn't mean that we need to do work that's going to, while telling the truth, that is our personal truth, that I feel like it's also best for us to do stuff that is, that's gonna allow you and anybody else in this room to be able to invest in it, rather than feeling like, this creator or this community doesn't want to have anything to do with me. I'm really I love the idea of the work being for everybody if they choose to engage with it. One of my favorite writers is a guy named James Ellroy. He's an American crime novelist and essayist. And fascinating guy. I went to go see him speak years ago. I can't necessarily speak to what James Ellroy is like as a person. I mean, maybe he's a totally cool guy. Comes across as incredibly racist. And his characters are certainly trafficked very heavily in racism. James Ellroy has talked about his love of racial invective and how he likes to have his characters be informed by this. And I've always found his work interesting and entertaining and kind of tough, and I like it, but I always have to sort of steel myself because he's not interested in building a community. He's actually kind of actively pushing folks away sometimes with his portrayals. I just kind of found the right gear to engage with his work. But on the one hand, while I admire how uncompromising he is with that work, I also would not want to be, I don't want to be calling people horrible names constantly and, when it's totally unnecessary. If I'm trying to illuminate a particular character, absolutely. But it seems like every single one of his characters is a horrible piece of shit, so I don't want to go down that road.
Great.
I probably didn't answer your question at all, but whatever. I'm sorry.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir. You're a moderator. What am I doing? If you do.
No, we're tag team. It's all good, man.
Works.
All right. Yes,
Oh,
sir.
I was asking about that Luke Cage comic that you're talking about.
Yes.
Is there anything future of that? Are you going to take that script and change the name a little bit?
Yeah, no, we're actively doing that right now.
Oh.
So for folks unfamiliar, my first job for Marvel Comics was about, almost 3 years ago now. And it was Luke Cage miniseries. And got a lot of buzz. Had one of the best times I've ever had writing comics, writing this thing. And it was, the basic premise of the story was, it sounds more political than it actually was. I mean, my stuff's always political, but it wasn't like a hit you in the face political story. It was an action adventure story with like politics kind of in the margins. But the premise was what would happen if the mother of George Floyd hired Luke Cage to protect her son's killer, to protect Derek Chauvin, the cop who killed him, from a mob, essentially. That was like the kind of core premise. Names changed to protect the innocent, blah, blah, blah. And, but it was like a straight up action adventure story. And it got canceled 2 weeks before it was supposed to be published because Marvel got afraid of the subject matter, and they were, afraid of a bunch of right-wing MAGA chuds coming after me. I don't care. Say what you gotta say. It doesn't bother me. But it bothered them. And also, I think at the time that, I don't know if folks remember, but Kyle Rittenhouse was a guy who went to a protest and shot a couple of people with an AR-15. Why do you have an AR-15 taking it to a protest, Kyle? That makes no sense. But he had just gotten acquitted, and there was like a kind of a uproar in the culture at that point, and they were and that was happening around the same time that Luke Cage was going to come out. So they got cold feet and they pulled the plug right before we were going to go to publication. And I just like done lettering notes and color notes, and the book was finished. It was weird. At any rate, so that was kind of a blow. And but we've taken that story and repurposed it with like a new character, and that is like being drawn like right now. So hopefully that'll make its appearance in the next year or so. Thanks for that question.
Thank you. Great question. And over here.
On that note, is with that whole book, how do you find the internal politics of Marvel, like the big guys now?
Yeah.
See that a lot of the general outside influences are affecting what they're actually publishing. There's more kind of steering what they're publishing. You don't have long form stories anymore. You don't have stories that last years.
Yeah.
Everything's generally 4-issue, then relaunch, 4-issue, relaunch. And it's kind of guided by political, you know what I mean?
I mean, here's the thing. Marvel's very fun to work with because most comic book fans have grown up with these characters. We're all exposed to them to one degree or another. If you don't read the comics, you've at least seen the TV shows and the movies. Everybody knows Marvel. And most people who got into comics on one level, we got into them when we were kids, and that was the stuff that we read. That's our gateway drug, if you will. And so that stuff it's kind of like in us, and getting to like type out Spider-Man and have him do stuff, so much fun. So there's always going to be an allure for the creator to want to work on this material, to play with these toys, as I put it. But the truth is, these are corporate comics. This is a giant corporation, and they don't give a crap about art or any artistic expression. That's not what they're there for. They're there to move units. So as soon as you do anything to kind of buck the corporate agenda, you're going to get slapped down. So, I've been lucky in that the editors that I've worked with have been pretty cool, and they've respected me enough to give me fair amount of leeway in doing what I want to do. But I'm also highly aware that the second that I say anything that they don't like, or I do anything that they don't like, that they pull the plug. So if you're willing to, and the other thing is, we all have I think we go in under the myth that you work for Marvel, you're going to get like beaucoup dollars. Yeah, no. So it's really like their reputation that kind of, and their global reach that keeps sucking people in. And then when you get in, you realize, this isn't quite what I signed up for. Just the politics that really kind of dictate the work, how the work is done, and what gets out there. It's a shame, but it is what it is. If you don't want to deal with that corporate animal, then just go do indie comics or whatever.
Well, okay, I'd like to really thank you for your time this afternoon. Audience, thank you for your time as well too. But
thanks for coming, folks. Big ton of people.